Hola, ¿cómo están? Yo soy Lina María, nuevamente por aquí saludándolos. Hoy les tengo un video súper chévere que quiero que analicemos juntos. Y nada, es de Jordan Peterson, es un personaje que sinceramente me parece increíble. Ya van a ver por qué.
I'm speaking with Chloe Cole, an 18-year-old so-called De-Transitioner from the Central Valley of California. She started her transition at 12 years old, puberty blockers and testosterone at 13, and had a double mastectomy at 15 years old. She is now a strong advocate against gender ideology and seeks legally to hold those propelling it forward accountable.
The problem with me starting it so young was not only that I couldn't consent, I couldn't really fathom the full picture of things. You know, I'll never be able to breastfeed. I'll never have that erogenous sensation in my chest back. I do hate to speak about it, but I'm experiencing sexual dysfunction at the age of 18. That's something that women usually go through when they're in their 40s to 50s.
Esta es la historia de una adolescente de 18 años que desde los 12 años inicia un proceso para hacer la transición de sexo. Es decir, ella llega a su pubertad a los 9 años, es una pubertad temprana. A los 12 inicia un tratamiento para tener bloqueadores de pubertad. A los 13 años inicia un tratamiento con testosterona. A los 15 años se somete a una doble mastectomía.
At this point in how I looked, I was very, very skinny. I was on the smaller chested side. And, you know, I grew up in an age where we kind of glorify bodies that are very, very voluptuous, lots of curves. People often use the phrase like bottom heavy or hourglass, pear shaped, things like that. And I didn't look like that at all. I was quite thin, a little on the muscular side. And if anything, my shoulders were probably the widest point in my body. And I kind of had a complex over this. I also liked having my hair short, and because of all this, I felt like if anything, I didn't really look like a girl at all. I didn't look like the other girls my age, and I felt like I just wasn't pretty and that I would never really have any.
So women are higher in negative emotion and they're more agreeable. And agreeableness is both compassion and politeness. And although the difference between men and women isn't massive, it's significant, and it also maximizes an egalitarian society. So it looks like it's biological. But the biggest difference is in interest. And boys, males, are more reliably interested in things, and girls, females, are more reliably interested in people.
Peterson hace una explicación general sobre la pubertad, sobre la diferencia de cómo se desarrollan los hombres y las mujeres. Nos dice, es normal que en la etapa de la pubertad temprana, las mujeres, sobre todo las mujeres, tengan más tendencia a tener malos sentimientos hacia ellas mismas, como que se empiezan a autojuzgar mucho. Ustedes ahora imagínense, esta adolescente, ella dice, yo crecí en una sociedad súper sexualizada, o sea, donde lo que era hermoso eran estos cuerpos súper voluptuosos. A los 9 años ella ya tenía una presión enorme en su cabeza, ya tenía una imagen establecida de cómo era una mujer, y obviamente no se identificaba con esa imagen que le habían dado, que le habían mostrado, que le habían dicho que era una mujer.
So imagine gender dysphoria. Okay, so 10 years ago it was comparatively rare, but not unheard of. But imagine it has two components, okay? One is a tendency towards negative emotion, so suffering, anxiety, depression, frustration, disappointment, pain, shame, guilt, self-consciousness, all of that. And then imagine there's a second part of it that's more specifically focused on discomfort with the body. Okay, the first part of that is the bulk of it. So if you look across forms of psychopathology, like mental illness, the major segment is high levels of negative emotion like depression and anxiety. And a secondary segment is the particular manifestation of that, in your case, in body dysmorphia. And so, and then the claims that uninformed mental health professionals make that you're at elevated risk for suicide if you're gender dysphoric is erroneous, because the elevated risk for suicide is actually a consequence of the general proclivity for depression and anxiety, and not a specific consequence of the gender dysphoria, or at least that's only a small subcomponent of it. There are good long-term studies of children with gender dysphoria. Most of them were conducted in Toronto, where I happen to be, by a man named Ken Zucker. And Zucker ran a clinic for gender dysphoric kids way before this became part of the culture war, let's say. And he was a very straight and honest scientist, a very good researcher, not a political person. And what he showed was, what his clinic showed, many peer-reviewed studies, was that gender dysphoria of the type that you described is relatively rare. But if you leave kids alone till they're 19 or 18, 80 to 90% of them settle into their biological identity.
Peterson nos explica entonces que la disforia de género tiene dos componentes grandes. Uno es como las malas emociones que los adolescentes que están en su etapa de pubertad sienten, y el otro componente es rechazo hacia su propio cuerpo. Es una incomodidad tremenda con su propio cuerpo. Sin embargo, dice, es parte del desarrollo de la pubertad. La pubertad es una etapa difícil para todo el mundo. ¿Qué pasa? Han hecho estudios en Canadá donde se dan cuenta que a los niños que presentan estos síntomas los dejan, digamos, crecer sin ninguna tendencia, manipulación, sin dirigirlos. O sea, no porque un niño a los 10, 11, 12, 13 años no le guste su cuerpo, no le guste lo que ve, no se sienta cómodo, no se identifique, no quiere decir que se vaya uno al otro extremo a decir es que naciste en el cuerpo que no era.
Demolished his career. And his guideline medically was, don't do any harm, right? Back the hell off. You can provide these kids with support and you can walk them through their emotional problems.
I'm mostly heterosexual. I'm mostly attracted to men, and I mean, I do have like a very marginal attraction to other women, but it's mostly sexual in nature. I don't really have any emotional attraction to them, and it's not something that I really ever care about, because I mean, it's not like I do want to have a family one day. I do want to have children, and I can't really do that naturally with a woman, so I just don't really see a point in it.
Okay, so when you were 12, you started therapy, and why was that, and what happened?
So I was about 11 when I got my first phone, and I started using social media. The main platform I would use was Instagram, so very image-oriented, very image-oriented.
Right,
and
right.
yeah,
Right.
It further reinforced and worsened my body image issues. I started comparing myself a lot to like my family and the other girls around me. I mean, a lot of my female family members are larger chested, but I got the smaller breasted genes, and I was really quite insecure about this. And even though I hit puberty earlier than my other peers, a lot of them were outgrowing me, and I felt like I just couldn't keep up with other women. And also, in a lot of my conversations, or like the conversations I would overhear between other girls and women, they often spoke very negatively of being a woman in general, like about how difficult puberty is and periods, and how scary it is to be pregnant and then give birth and then have all these expectations placed on you as a mother.
Su primer red social fue Instagram. Lo que me causa curiosidad a mí es que ella ni siquiera está mencionando modelos, actrices, ninguna persona famosa. Ella dice, veía las publicaciones de las mujeres de mi familia veía las publicaciones de mis compañeras de clase.
But at roughly the same time that I started using social media, I started seeing feminist content and just the hell that is Instagram. I would also see a lot of like LGBT focused content. And a lot of it was like teenagers and young adults who identified as transgender or non-binary, and it was primarily young women. And I would often see a lot of them had the same struggles with as I did, socially, and many of them weren't exactly the closest with their families. And I would see them go from struggling to changing their expression and then eventually becoming more accepted by their families. And it seemed like people really supported them and had their backs, and that they had this sense of community around them. And that was something that really touched me, because I didn't really realize it at the time, but that was something that I wish that I had.
El hecho de que una niña tenga la conclusión de que no quiere ser mujer porque el feminismo le ha vendido la idea de que ser mujer es lo peor que le puede pasar, eso dice mucho.
You're having a bit of a difficult time socially in middle school, and now you're seeing on Instagram the emergence of this explanation for your problems that's generated by people who sound like they have the same issues that you do. And what you see is that when they adopt this new non or gender fluid identity, that, well, what do you see? What happens when they have a community all of a sudden, people are supportive of them? Like, why did that become attractive to you?
I think I saw the similarities between me and them in a lot of ways. And I mean, when I was younger, I was often compared to a boy, and I liked hearing things like, "Oh, you're being such a boy," or "Wow, you're such a boy," from like my older sister and mom and stuff. It just made me, I didn't really know why at the time, but it just made me proud to. And especially as I got older, I really wanted a way out. And when I started seeing this content, it taught me that there was, and that I didn't have to be a woman.
Ella decide contarle a sus papás a través de una carta que quiere ser un hombre, que se identifica más con el género masculino, que se siente más cómoda siendo un hombre porque esa es la información que hasta el momento ella tiene y que cree que es la correcta, ¿verdad? Sus papás, en medio del impacto de la noticia, piden ayuda profesional. Entonces ella empieza su sesión, sus terapias con esta persona que desde el primer momento simplemente le dice, bueno, eres un niño, naciste en cuerpo de una mujer, pero realmente eres un niño. O sea, no hay un tratamiento de diagnosis, no hay un conducto regular, no se toca el tema un poco más a profundidad de qué hay detrás de todo esto, qué está pasando en su vida, cuál es el dolor de esta persona.
It's corrupt to the point of malevolence, what the medical professionals are doing on this front. And that is the insistence, well, would you rather have a live trans child or a dead child? Which is, I don't think there's anything more toxic you can say to a parent than that. There's no evidence that transitioning kids are less likely to be suicidal. There's no evidence that that's the only treatment path that works. And there's certainly no evidence that there's no alternative to transition or suicide.
Yeah, they were definitely coerced into it. And first one who I saw actually was the only person who really pushed back on this. After the appointment, he said, you're very young, you're 13, and this could have some negative implications for your brain development going forward. After that, I was just referred to another endocrinologist who, after about 2 or 3 appointments, gave me the consent forms for blockers. I started about a month after that, and then I had another appointment to sign off on the forms for testosterone. And my mom also had to sign off on them. I don't know if it's still true now that you need your parents to, if you're a minor, to sign off on forms for hormones or anything like that, because they're trying to push for kids being able to independently make that choice. But I was barely a teenager. You know, kids kind of tend to think that they're invincible, that nothing could get them. But I started experiencing some complications that affect me to this day.
Ella misma lo llama, digamos, al principio, tomando su tratamiento de hormonas, estaba en la luna de miel. Una luna de miel que la hacía sentir más segura. Vinieron las complicaciones con su tracto urinario, infecciones. Ya nos explica que desarrolló una adicción a la pornografía porque su libido estaba supremamente alto, también debido a las hormonas que estaba tomando, que no podía satisfacerlos en la vida real.
My endocrinologist asked me some questions that were very adult in nature. I was basically being sexualized by my doctors. It was like, are you aware that you may experience vaginal atrophy, or are you aware that this may affect your ability to have children as an adult? And I just went along with it. It was like, oh yeah, I know that. I don't plan on having kids, and I also I never had sex by that point, so I didn't know just what effect any of that would have on my body. But I was being treated as if I were an adult with the mental faculties to be able to consent to all of this and understand what I was consenting to. But I wasn't. I was just a kid. The type of incision that I got was called double incision with nipple grafts, meaning that they would not only take out the breast tissue and contour the chest to look more masculine, they would also deep scrapes on both sides of my chest, kind of like a deep knee scrape.
Yo creo que es claro que aquí la víctima sin duda fue ella. Ella era una niña, ella no tenía la madurez suficiente para entender, para dimensionar a lo que se estaba sometiendo. ¿Qué está pasando en el mundo para que ahora los médicos, los terapeutas, los psicólogos estén en pro de todo esto? ¿Cómo es posible que un terapeuta o un cirujano o un endocrino le pida consentimiento a un niño de 13 años para empezar a cambiar su cuerpo? Que esto es lo más irracional y lo más loco que estamos viviendo hoy en día, que le demos tanta responsabilidad a un niño, a un adolescente, que uno consigue su desarrollo, al menos su cognición de lo que es el mundo, como hasta los 25 años, es que se termina de desarrollar el cerebro. Ahora díganme cómo es posible que una profesional de la salud espere que una niña a los 13 años tenga conciencia y esté tomando una decisión de manera responsable, lógica. Esto es absurdo.
Earlier this year, I started to start speaking out publicly about my experience with transitioning and then stopping transition.
No me fiaría de todos los profesionales. Haría una investigación supremamente cuidadosa, supremamente responsable de a qué profesional les estoy entregando la vida de mi hijo o hija. No todos los profesionales son adecuados, no todos los profesionales tienen esto que se llama ética profesional. Y si pueden acompañar un proceso de estos, tengan siempre presente que la mayoría de los jóvenes, después de que pasan toda esta época de adolescencia y alrededor de los 18 años más o menos, en su mayoría aceptan su género biológico, se identifican con su género biológico sin tener que someterse a una cosa tan cruda como una transición de género. Lo pueden buscar en el canal de Peterson para verla completa. La entrevista es supremamente bonita. Esto es todo por hoy. Yo soy Lina María. Espero que les haya gustado mucho este tema. Y nada, nos vemos. Chao.